Marion is a registered landscape architect in 6 states. I count each state. She received a master's in landscape architecture from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University and a Bachelor of Landscape Architecture from SUNY ESF at Syracuse. As a practitioner, Marion has been extremely active in the community of landscape architecture and associate professions. She's served on numerous boards associated with the Boston Society of Landscape Architects, the BSLA. She's been on the board of trustees of the American Society of Landscape Architects. We work together on the Hubbard Educational Foundation. She's been on National Association of Olmsted Parks as a director, and many other associations. She's been a teacher. She's taught at RISD at the Graduate School of Design, and she's taught for the Landscape Institute at the Arnold Arboretum. The firm has received many awards, and her work has received many awards. Some of the awarding agencies have included the Boston Society of Landscape Architects, the New York City Art Commission, the Boston Society of Architects, Pittsburgh chapter of the American Institute of Architects, and she was also recognized by the ASLA and is a fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects. We are most fortunate to have Marion here this evening again, and I'd like you all to welcome Marion Pressley.
Okay. This is a park in Pittsburgh that I've been working on for basically from about 2001 to 2014. It went through 4 phases of construction, and it has a cost of about $35 million was spent on it. And it is a cultural landscape. It is a national historic landmark. I worked with a multidisciplinary team, even including archaeologists. Archaeology will play a big part in this park. We were working for multiple public agencies. The state owns the park. The city was maintaining it. Nonprofit organizations, the River Life Task Force and the Allegheny Conference. And we were in a set of priorities. We had to have this done by a certain date. And this is what it looked like when we were starting. Oops, but that's not supposed to do that. This is the park itself. It's called Point State Park. This is the fountain, which you see whenever you see a PNC game going on or the Steelers playing at Heinz. It was designed in about 1954 by Griswold, who was a very well-known landscape architect in Pittsburgh, and Stotts was the architect. And it took them 20 years to build it. So we felt we were doing pretty well getting it accomplished in 12. So this is as it's finished. It's part of a riverfront park system. This is called the Three Rivers Park. From the north comes the Allegheny. From the south comes the Monongahela. That turns into the Ohio, and the Ohio hits the Mississippi. This was the really first gateway to the west, way before St. Louis. In fact, the boats left from here and eventually got to St. Louis and then went on. And it took us about that long, it took us that time to do it. It's considered the jewel in the piece. If you've never been to Pittsburgh, it has been cleaned up. It was very polluted at one time, but at this point it is looking very good, and it is also known very much for all of its bridges. So these are the Three Sisters down in here. There are bridges on all sides and on up to the west. And a number of them are suspension bridges. Roebling came here to Saxonburg in this area before he went on to Trenton and New York. This is the master plan as we finished it. This is the kind of thing we do in order to get money. It sounds crazy, but we use this, and you'll see different diagrams taken out of it. Because when you work for a private nonprofit, they have to be able to get your salary from someplace. Heinz Foundation basically paid for all our time. And this is the point, and this thing's going quicker than it doesn't seem to be work there. We have the city itself, back in here. This is the city. We have the Fort Pitt Bridge, the Fort Duquesne Bridge. Fort Pitt named after the English fort, Duquesne named after the French fort that was on the site. And they basically put the bridge through the middle. Now I'm going to go fast through this. George was actually here. This was a site that we can say George Washington was there during the French and Indian War, and that's its dates. He was there in 1753, and he spent time viewing the rivers. It's known as the Forks of the Ohio. That's its name for the National Register. And this is just a rendering of it by an artist. In the museum itself, there is a replica of what it looked like when Fort Pitt was at its height. This is a 5-sided fort. These are the bastions. This was the village that was growing out from it. The original Fort Duquesne was down in here, now long gone. So this is the piece when it was at its height for the British. And then settlement goes on after we get the initial war time, and by 1785 to 1815, we see the city growing. Here was the original fort. This is a diagram of it. In fact, Stotts went to the British Museum in England to get the actual plans of the fort, because one of the things they did was reproduce it on site. Of course, it was long gone. So this is the city, gridded out. And what happened eventually is it was filled over the top, and we have it looking like this. So this is where the park is eventually going to come in. And by the 1900s, this is Pittsburgh. Steel, the Expo Center, a bridge going here, another bridge going there, right across the point. You can still see the three sister bridges that are still in place. And this is the Mon coming down, and this is the Allegheny. The French came from the north, down the Allegheny. The English came up from the south, from Washington. And this is it as it's growing. Basically here, I'm just reminding you of what it looked like in the period before, in 1795. And so by 1902 and 1900, we have a city placed on this. Now they also filled it considerably over the top, many feet of fill. These are some of the bridges, and as I said, they're known for this is the Smithfield Bridge, another suspension bridge, and the Three Sisters in the 1900s and as they look today. And this is the city basically in 1943. The park starts to happen. We start to have the idea of the park and the idea of the urban renewal. They're going to literally demo this entire part of the city. It's going to be completely demoed in order to put the park and then to put the mixed use that they have in back. Hotels, office space, that kind of thing. And so in 43, it was the dirty, grimy industrial city that it was for many years. And this is a cross-section done by our archaeologist. And it's important because we're looking at the fact that the water at the time of the forts was at 700. It's now up at 710. So the water level has raised. This is little Fort Duquesne. This is back here. This moat is part of Fort Pitt. And then the city came in and built all of this over the top of it. And the water, and this was built over the top. And so when Stotts and Griswold went in, one of the first things they did was cut down all of this level here. They took all of this land off. This is the blockhouse, the only original piece from 1764. It's the redoubt where they kept the ammunitions. And that is the only piece left on site. And then this is, as you can see, this is the current elevation going through now. And so archaeologically, if you go 18 inches down anywhere on this side, you're into archaeology, and the job stops, basically, when you hit something. Here's an overlay of the military occupation, which is the primary period of significance, 54 to 84. And you see Fort Duquesne, this tiny little wooden thing down here. This line that you see going through is a tracery, actually in place in parts here. That is the original shoreline. So when they built this, they built all of this out with sheet piles in order to build the park. Fort Pitt is this one, but before Fort Pitt, there was a little tiny British fort when they first came over, 1759, and it's called Mercer's. That was taken down, and then this is the big fort pit. Now, it's 1946. What happens is called the Pittsburgh Renaissance. It's what was happening all over the United States in the 40s and 50s, complete demolition of parts of cities. And as I said, it wiped out that whole bottom part of the city. There were major corporations here: U.S. Steel, Heinz, PPG is Pittsburgh Glass, the Bank of New York, the Mellon Bank, Federated Investors, Alcoa, PNC is a bank again. And so there's a whole series of major corporations. There's also a series of industrial barons. Many of these you've heard of. Andrew Carnegie, everyone's heard of him. Henry Clay Frick, Henry J. Heinz, Andrew Mellon, and George Westinghouse were all major barons in the city at that time. Now, one of the things that does for us is they have a lot of money still there. And so when they get ready to do projects, they can go to Heinz, they can go to PNC Bank, they can go to these people to get the money that they need to do a lot of these projects. And that does make a difference. Now, what happened is the Allegheny Conference on Community Development was established as a nonprofit era thing. And it was basically established in 1944. And it led the charge, basically, in terms of doing the urban renewal. It also had a pollution control program at that time in place, in terms of, because pollution was a major issue in Pittsburgh. And they were the ones who planned the Gateway Center, which is the part that's called the Gold Triangle, or the industry. They were also involved in doing Point State Park. Now, Point State Park is one of the only state parks in Pennsylvania. And this was the plan. They established a 36-acre piece of land. This is the city back in here is still the original city. All of this that you see here, all of these buildings, are all part of that new development. They took the bridges that were going across here and moved it back to this point, built the new Pitt Bridge, the new Duquesne Bridge, established the 10th Street bypass and the other bypass that's on this side. So you literally come through the tunnel in, and then you shoot around either side. And all along here is hard edge. Now, that goes back to the 1910 plan of Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. when he was advising them when they were doing their city work in the 1900s to establish a hard edge on the edge of this area. And that's both on the north side and the south side as well. It's 36 acres. And as I said, it was designated in 1960, which is a very early designation. And it was for the forts. So anything you see here in this picture is not part of the designation per se. Only this little tiny building, which is under these trees, is the only piece left from that period of its designation. This is the tentative revised ultimate plan. You can imagine how many they went through. And this was the plan that was finally approved by the governor. It became known as the Gateway to the West. And it shows what they were trying to establish. Darn it, this thing is just too sensitive. I'm going to keep going with this other thing. So what you're seeing here is Liberty comes down through. And from this point, you can walk across. They were originally going to have a little drawbridge over the moat. Then they were going to take you through this, which is the portal. And on line with that, going down through, right on axes, is Fort Duquesne and the fountain. So in reality, this is a very French design. It has a major central axis right from the very beginning. It has the blinders on, so to speak. The woodlands on either side create the axes. They reinforce the axes. And so really you're looking the entire time you're coming through right straight down to here. And then, of course, the Ohio is going out. Meanwhile, they established a lower promenade. There is an upper promenade. And then there is a lookout up in here. They took all the grade down in these other areas. And in fact, I should have put the picture into the readout. And when they started doing demo, this sat in a hole. Literally, they had to take the soil around it to get it back to grade of the original grade from the earlier period. The only piece that they kept as a raised portion was over here as the overlook. Here we are at the Allegheny Conference Community Development meeting for the first time in the Duquesne Club in 1951. And for the Pittsburghers are very much into traditional things. When we had our first meeting to start Point State Park, we had our meeting at the Duquesne Club, right there. And we all went in, and we had about 70 or 80 or even more people attending this thing for the very first community meeting that started up. And here they are. These are the barons of industry, many of these people. These are all very wealthy, very well-connected people who are in this club. And this is the model that was built by the architect and the landscape architect. Renderings that went with it. Now, at this time, it was Griswold and Renner, and Clark and Rappuano. I don't know if you know that name. They're out of New York City. Clark and Rappuano are a big firm in New York at this period, and Griswold and Renner were from here in Pittsburgh. And so what they've done is they've done a rendering of what they want it to look like. Here's the portal, the arch, and then another arch goes over. So this is the axes, down to the 150-foot fountain up in the side, woods on either side, and in the French manner, they originally were going to hedge the whole thing around with a very tall hedge, as you can see, taller, at least 12 foot or better. We have their interpretation here. In 1954, people were not doing historical interpretation in parks. This is really very much of a first. Not only did they research it by going to the original drawings in England and original drawings in France, but they then reproduced it as traceries on the ground. And in this case, they built a moat. They were trying to reflect the moat. So it's down in, and you can see the earthworks that are all in here, the way this was working. And so this is the piece that is one of the bastions. This is the music bastion. The next bastion, which was over here, the Ohio, they did it on the ground. They took the museum and put it in the Monongahela bastion. They did the flag bastion over on the other side, and the fifth bastion couldn't be done because it was under the highway. But they rebuilt it, basically. Here we have a look at the redoubt, looking back to the city. This is the museum, and their idea at this time was to make this an earthen berm. Who was doing green roofs? Nobody was doing green roofs. Absolutely nobody. But here they were. This is gone because they've increased the size of the museum, wiped this whole thing out, and raised it up on another story level sometime in the 80s. And this is the big view. As you come through the portal, you're coming through in, you have a vert right here. You have the great lawn surrounded by trees and native plantings. It was supposed to be plants that existed at the time that George Washington was there. And we have our large central fountain. And if we were a little more on axes, we would be seeing down the river, but it is a turn. This is what it looked like as it was under construction. In '54, they did first the Allegheny side, and they were literally building the park while they were deconstructing others. They didn't take these bridges down until much later. Here's the arch being worked on for the portal. So it was something that for 20 years sat there in various ways of construction. And finally, in the 70s, you see the city, what we'll term the city side, completed. Here you see the moat. You see the entry. This is Liberty, where you'd have the view across. They gave up on the idea of the drawbridge and instead did a circle around on either side to come to the center to go over. Bridges are still in place. And you can see they did minor planting in different places. Here it is again in the 70s, a better view of it perhaps so you can see what was done. These are the earliest plantings, a lot of which failed in the first 10 years and had to be replanted. And this is it as it's complete by 1974. And so you see everything in place. Here's the flag bastion, the Mon bastion. You see the fort, the edge of where the water was, and you see the woodlands. This one obviously now grown more because it went in 20 years before this one did. Now, at this point in 2000, River Life Task Force came into being as a public-private partnership. These were very popular in the 90s and now into the 2000s as well. Their focus was the creation of the Three Rivers Park. So they've worked on the north side, on the south side, and of course in the middle of the rivers. Their mission is to reclaim, restore, and promote their riverfronts, and they have done a really great job of it, including a convention center that's come in to the east. This is being accomplished by developing capital projects. Somebody's got to get the money. They were able to raise enough private money to go to the state, to have the state do a bond thing to accumulate $35 million. They supported these capital projects and by these public and private partnerships, such as Heinz and some of the others, and they advocated for environmental preservation as part of this. This is their mission, if you read it. In our job was to integrate, especially if you stay on the right side, the Point State Park into the Three Rivers Park. It's considered the jewel of this piece. We had to respect its NHL status. In other words, we have certain rules laid down by the National Park Service once something is an NHL. We also needed to respect the Griswold and Stotts design, which was acclaimed at its time as a very important thing, won many awards. But we were supposed to explore change. We had to be environmentally sensitive to the river's ecosystem. We had to develop a strong statement on the event uses. Now, what happened is when this park was designed, it was designed as a passive park. There was no active recreation. You were not allowed to ride a bicycle in the park. In fact, the mayor, when we were getting ready to start our first community meeting, got on his bike with his family. They all got on their bikes and rode into the park and got arrested because they were not allowed to. And so that was the kind of thing he was trying to make a point of. It was really an event space. It has better than a dozen major events happening in it with thousands of people and a lot of minor things that happen as well. And other times, there was nobody in it because the events had thousands of people, did lots of damage, and then during the week, nothing happened. In fact, there were almost no benches in the site except along the promenades. Whole areas of this 36 acres had no place to sit. So it was passive completely. Also in the legislation, it said that there would be no plop and drop art going on here. You have to remember that in 1946, we're after World War II. We are right now in a tremendous period of memorialization ourselves. We don't really care where we plop and drop things for every single thing. And that was what they were afraid of here. And this legislated park does not allow memorialization or public art placed in it. Now, how do we get around that? They didn't say anything about interpretive. So we can bring interpretive things in, but we can't call them art. And this was an inaccessible site. You could not get from the main area down to the lower promenade. There was nothing but steps. There was really no way to take a wheelchair or anybody who was disabled through this park when we started on it. So one of our big missions was to accomplish that. Here we are on July 4th, any July 4th. You can see what's happening. We have boat hookups, which we still have. It gets lined with boats. It gets thousands and thousands of people in it. And back here, nothing was happening at that time, although sometimes this gets used as well. So it is an event space. Here we have the regatta. This is on the north side, and there are bleachers that are built into the park. And look at the thousands of people you have sitting along this thing. They also had jamborees, and they had a stage, sometimes a temporary, sometimes a permanent stage, on the Great Lawn with big screens for seeing it, sound. You wouldn't believe the extravaganzas that were going on there. Here's one for the Three Rivers Arts Festival, which is on the city side. This is one that happened a year ago, so we still do have these events. Here we are on Marathon Day. I don't think you could get more people into this unless you're standing, tongue-in-cheek. One of the things that we worked on was trying to make this into an event space. And that's one of the things I'll show you. Silly things. Pittsburgh loves to do all kinds of crazy things. A water balloon fight. What a great idea for a Sunday afternoon or a Saturday when there's really nothing going on, right? So here are all the water balloons, the teams, all in their colors, each one a different one. It's like going to Siena and having the running of the bulls, So here we are in the middle of this water balloon fight that goes on in the middle of the park. We have Frisbee parks. We have Frisbee contests. We have all the dogs out there Frisbeeing. Whoops, this one I didn't want to miss. The duck. This is an art piece. It's not in the park. It's floating. It was brought in October 2013, and it floated around outside here, outside the park, the big rubber ducky. I thought one of the best ones that I saw was Anything That Floats race. You make anything up you want. You build it yourself out of a raft or whatever you do. It's part of the, it happens on July 4th. It also sometimes happens at the regatta. And you look at the numbers of people just lining the edge. This is after we'd done construction. And first night happens here, fireworks displays, lighting of the tree. They do an artificial tree that they've done for years. And they have this all goes on at the beginning of the Christmas season so they can sell. Because remember, these people from the conference were into economics, and that's one of the reasons that happens. Now, another reality. Here's the ecological reality. This place floods. It has at least, every year, at least 3 to 4 submersions. And you can see up here on the flood map what it's doing. This is, if you follow the line, this is the end of the point. So all of the promenades, if there's a 6-foot rise, which is a normal, are underwater. That also comes up on top of the Fountain Plaza. So the Fountain Plaza is underwater. Then we get the big ones. 72 went on 36 feet. Over the whole park was wet. The highest one was 46 feet in 1936. So this floods on a regular basis, which is one of the reasons why when Olmsted did the master plan for the city in 1910, he recommended a hard edge on all of these edges and not a natural system. This is the little redoubt underwater. There's the museum. You can see how it's totally flooded. And this was very recent. This was only in 2010. That's the fountain. So the water has come up over the lower promenade, up onto the Fountain Plaza, and is almost up into the park at this point. This is when we're under construction out here. And that's the fountain, literally, where the water would come up from here. And I've seen boats in this. Ice comes down. I've seen boats just thrown into the fountain. You see them all in different angles. They're really it's really quite exciting. So here's our master plan. And you know what's interesting? There's a cam set up on Mount Washington, which is on the south side. And you can go into the cam, watch the cam, and you can see the flood water come up, and you can just keep watching it for a few days, and you see the flood water come down. And they clean this off. I came in about 2 days the last time after the water had gone, and they already had it cleaned off. You had no mud anywhere, so they're very good at keeping track of things. So this is our plan, and I'm going to go into it in detail. What we did is we tried to break it up into zones, because remember that events were an important thing to us. So we said, all right, we have city side. Anything on this side of the portal, where Liberty comes down. This is a parking lot that they make about $300,000 of revenue off of it that they use to maintain the park. That's their revenue off that lot. And so what we did is we decided that this would be called city side, and we'd approach it from that angle. Now, there were no benches anywhere here. The only benches on this side of city side were right along Commonwealth Place. Those are the only seating in this entire couple 100,000 square foot. So we went back and we looked at the important view, the sacred view. We looked to see, this was their original design, what that was about and how it worked. I was very, very lucky. There were 2 people still alive who had worked on this park starting in 54 up to 74. They were no longer associated with the Griswold firm, but I was able to interview them. They gave me a slideshow. They gave me pictures. These are pictures they took in 1974 showing how the park looked at that time. And this is literally the view of walking down, coming to the portal, seeing the fountain at the end, and walking through and having the fountain there. It was very lucky to have them, and they participated in all the meetings. Now, we also worked with Tim Marshall, who is known for his maintenance plans and his ability to work with event spaces. He made his reputation down in Central Park. And we looked at this as to how to work with it. Here is Cityside. We discovered if we took the center piece, we had 131,000 square foot of event space. we had support space, which you see in yellow, of about 65,000. Now, when events happened here normally, everything was used. You had at least 2 or 3 semi-trucks in here, semi-trailers driving in. You had semi-trailers driving in here. You had the whole the thing was just full of trucks, full of porta potties, you name it, it was all there. So we decided to look at this and say, okay, if we could keep certain of the events that had the tents, that had the vendors, that had all the activity, who needed supply of water, who needed power, and if we could make this an event space and literally give them what they needed and use the paths as the way to get there, allow them to be able to set up their tents around the outside, around in here, and be able to use it. And we also did away with Commonwealth Place because what we wanted to do is we wanted to stop the semi-trucks from driving in. So what we did is the 10th Street bypass gets cut off from here down to here at the hotel. We created a turnaround in the street for the hotel and for the housing that's here. That allows us to use this space for the vehicles out on the road still. And so what we did is really commandeered that. The S's are possible places you could set up a temporary stage. The power and everything was there to have it. We also talked about having a kiosk here, which we do have, a cafe kiosk. We then looked at this space as overflow space. And we have a lot of space there. Waterside has 194,000 right in that purple area. That is good for the July 4th, it's good for the regatta, it's good for a lot of things. But it's overflow in that it's never going to have tents out here, it's never going to have vendors out here, it's going to just be people. And so that's how we divided it up. Plus we have the water edge. Now remember, the regatta happens all along here. And this is the existing bleacher seating. We extended it down into here. We actually added a lot of seating down in this area as part of it, because this is where all of that happens. Now the water barge idea, for many years before they finished it in '74, they would, out in this area before they put the fountain in, set up a temporary stage and have a barge out there where that was where the play would take place that you would watch, or the music would take place. And so the idea being that maybe there could be a barge out there was another piece. Now here we are in 2002 with how they're using it. They're setting up everything. Now they've got, out of that 131,000 square feet, they've got less than half of it that they can actually use. Because the moat, which is here, and the slopes, this is all graded, so you really can't walk on any of this. You can see where you can. This is flat. This is flat. And so we took a step that probably had the history people jumping off the roof and looked at the original Bastion plan, which basically was simply an interpretation of where the fort had been. There's nothing authentic about it in terms of the pavers that are there or anything on that order. They don't have anything that's real. But they created it as a piece, and you can see the slopes on the banks, the slopes here, very French treatment of that. And we decided that one of the things we would do, and we worked out with this with the State Historic Preservation Office, is put this into a tracery, a granite tracery, and literally outline exactly where it was. And that's not, they don't have it exactly where it was. We took it and put it where it was. It continues over, and those traceries in the other, you can see the tracery down here for Duquesne. And now we have a total central space that's totally usable. And this is how it's used. And then this machine just doesn't listen. Here we are with the turnaround, and we have seating in here as well, but we are able to block this off. We usually have the stage over in this spot because it seems to work best, although the housing is all over here. They weren't too happy. And then we have the tents and things that go in. Here's our little cafe and kiosk piece. One of the reasons we have that is there are thousands of people who park on the north side in the parking lots that are over there. They come across the flyover on the Fort Duquesne Bridge and come right down here, walk through the portal, come right past this spot, and continue into town where they work. So we literally have thousands of people walking through there on a daily basis. And it's good for morning coffee. Here's an event happening. This is just a minor race. It's not a big one. It's a junior race in September 2008. So by then we had this finished. We have our benches lining the side. We couldn't resist just totally putting benches in. Now, one of the things historically, we should have probably put hedges back in. I mean, if we went to the original design that was done, and we should have had hedges that ran this whole thing. And instead, we decided that the benches would probably do just as well to stop people from going up over it. So what we did is we did these continuous benches along the side, all new lighting. This is the cafe up at the other end. And the paving here is all of the kind that can take vehicles on it. It's a heavy paving. It's what's called rustic terrazzo, which is the standard detail for the sidewalks in Pittsburgh. It's like a terrazzo material that's rough and rusticated, and you can do it in different colors. And then originally, the Griswold had this lined with bluestone, again, another native stone, Pennsylvania stone. That was the edge of the thing, and we put that back in. Here's our little cafe. It's for morning coffee. It has interior lighting. It has a green wall, and it has a green roof. It also has art interpretation of the different foliage that's etched into the glass, and when you see it closed, it has a map that shows you what Fort Pitt looked like, so you can understand what you were seeing. And this is our little cafe area, which is very heavily used. And now we go to waterside. Anything that's over here, but up on the upper promenade. In other words, the limits of the upper promenade as it goes here are the top of what's waterside. And in waterside, we had a stage, which we did away with because we didn't want all the trucks coming through. You can see the outline of the tracery here. You can see the museum here. And so what we did, our biggest part of this is the revegetating of the woodlands, the re-putting in of the woodlands. So here we are. We have planted the woodlands. I think it was about $250,000 was spent on plants in here, mostly ground covers and things on that order, some trees. And we planted this in a separate budget of about, I think it was $90,000 was spent up in there. We had a planting plan that was done by Winters, by Margaret Winters. Here are pictures of it basically as it was done. And I think I have some more blow-ups when we get to the vegetation. Very unsightly stage that had become a place for debris. They didn't use it. They would put a stage in front of it, and it had all kinds of things piled in the woodlands. This is the area where reenactments happen. The museum has now been taken over by the Heinz History Center. It was part of the state park originally. Heinz History Center has taken it over, has put a lot of money into it, and is basically holding reenactments. We not only have the Brits and the French, we also have things that happen like tribal dancing. Part of our group who came to the community meetings, and there were about well over 100 people, included Native Indians who came as part of that. And they have events in the park on a regular basis. So here we are. This is the piece that's waterside. We have the Fort Duquesne tracery, which was redone. We have this is redone. We have two buildings. The restrooms were refurbished, and the pump house, which was over here, was refurbished. Woods completely replaced. And I'll get to the side pieces, but what we created were water taxi areas and amphitheater areas on both the north and the south sides. But I'll get to that more. Then we have the zone that's the Fountain Plaza and the water promenades. This is the area that goes underwater. So anything that was underwater went into this category. And so this gets done in a very different way. One of our problems here was, the big issue here was handicap accessibility. You cannot get down. There's nothing but steps everywhere. Steps here, steps everywhere. And you can get to this if you come in off the 10th Street bypass or if you come up Mon Wharf, but you cannot really get from this proper piece down. The other thing that was interesting is they had developed the flyover, which was attached to the Duquesne Bridge. Unfortunately, this was not 5%. They had it at something like 8 or 10%. So it wasn't accessible, even though it was supposed to be the accessible entrance. So we started looking at this as a thing in itself. The other thing that happens at this lower area is there's really no place to sit again here. You had the Fountain Plaza. There's not a bench in sight. And you had basically a coping that was about twice the size that we'll end up with. In other words, it was very high. You had to really get pushed up on top of it, a big open pool of water with the central fountain and the peacocks. And yet if you climbed up on this, you were pretty high up and you really weren't seating there. The only real seating they had were these steps that were right in this area. The other thing we were looking at is handicapped accessibility. We were going to break into the riprap on the sides, put in steps that come down on both sides. We ended up not doing that one and doing this one and doing it in a different way. We also looked at the fountain to see how we could use it. We wanted to lower the coping, put in a new coping, raise it up, have water running over. There's a sort of one of those stories in Pittsburgh. There's believed to be a fourth river. And there isn't one really. But there's a fourth river in everybody's mind that runs underground. And so what we were trying to do is sort of celebrate the idea of the fourth river. And this was the idea that we did a lot of sketches in order for them to try to raise money because they needed to get money to do this fountain over. And at first we were going to have a high back here. We were going to put an inner ring in, have the water spill over so that you could touch it and you would sit on a lower level with a new coping. And that was the first plan. That isn't what we did. Instead, we decided that the best thing to do was to raise the plaza up about a foot. So what we did is we added a set of steps here, raised this up so that now the coping, the original high coping, you can sit on. It's about 24, 26 inches, something like that, so you can actually sit on it. And so we did that. We've redone the whole edges. I'll talk more about the paving. We put everything back in the original pavement patterns. There was a very much of a articulated pattern of limestone and bluestone, which I'll explain what happened with that. So here's the fountain. We have, again, a ring, but smaller. We have a seat where everybody can sit, and so everyone sits on this area, and you can still touch the water. And this is what I loved about it, because this is what I knew would happen, and everybody thought I was crazy. If you stand at the steps and you look down on it, just like you do here, you feel like the fountain is floating in the water, because you do not see the lower promenade. You see people, a few of them down here, sitting on the benches, and notice the people sitting, and now they sit with their feet in the water, because this is a very shallow water in here, and they're able to do that. This is the original piece, without the inner ring, without the water, without the seats. And so that's basically it. We restored the two buildings and raised the plaza and redid the entire plaza. Now to look at these on the sides, what we have here on the promenade part, the lower promenade, we have a transition, and the Great Allegheny Passage is a bike route that starts in Washington, D.C. and ends at Point State Park. And so that they had a big celebration when that opened. We had to have bike and pedestrian access. The big thing we were able to do, and the mayor stood up and cheered, was allow bicycles in. We do not allow rollerbladers, we don't allow skateboards, but we were able to get bicycles into the park, and we have a bike route through the park. We had to do a universal accessibility. We have it at this end, we have it at this end on this side. We have a maintenance service area, which is over here. That was kept. We have seasonal dockage. We did add on the seasonal dockage again, put in all the tie-ups. We talked about having a trailhead facilities that we were going to put down here. That has not happened. And we had access to the water that you would be able to do here. One of the things that we didn't do that I really wanted to do was add water steps out at the end here. We were going to have steps that go, like in Venice where you can step down in towards the canal. They wouldn't let me do that. It's not going to be allowed. Kayaking, boating is big here. This is the passage going down towards Mon Wharf. This is how they come through the spaghetti to come up to us. This is the museum. This is the maintenance building. And these were the docking things. This is still going to be happening. This piece is still will be under construction soon. Here's our amphitheater and water taxi area, and our handicapped accessibility, because you're able to get down through here. We basically took out the riprap that went across like this. You can see why $35 million got spent. There's a lot of hard landscape here that had to be restored. So here's the amphitheater. And also by doing that, we were able to open up a view from here directly to the redoubt. we changed the path here somewhat in order to get an axis through in this space. And this is the flag bastion, which is the only piece that hasn't been done to date of the park proper. Here's the amphitheater, the bike route. You can actually come down and take a wheelchair into here. And this is the pavement. We reused all the limestone blocks. This riprap was all reset, cleaned up, the walls were cleaned. This is all original. We had to cut it off so that this is new, because the riprap originally came across like this. So we cut it back, put in stairs, put in the whole thing, and the paths and things were redone, new benches. This is it at night. There's a lot of night lighting. We not only have the pedestrian lights, we have lighting up into the trees. Pittsburgh is a very much lit at night city. I mean, it is just amazing how many lights they have on. All their bridges have lights on them. It's a very active place at night. Here's our ramp. This is all new sandstone, and what we did, now, I mean, this is used sandstone. The pieces that we took out here, we reused. We reused all the limestone block. One of the things that Griswold and Stotts did was they were way ahead on Leeds credits. They not only used only native stones and native materials, but they reused massive amounts of these limestone blocks that were in the city. They were the streets in the city. They were just, nobody brought limestone block on when they did it the first time, and we didn't bring any on this time, but we reused it all. And this is all hard surface because, and we debated about putting plants in, because the water will be right up to here. It will be literally up there during a flood. And people have tried on north side. Michael tried to put planting in. I think it was a year or 2 years of flooding, and it was mostly all washed out. He's got mostly weeds over there now. And so we learned from that, and so did Fred Bonsi when he did Mon Wharf, decided not to do plantings in the flood zone. And so we've reused the material, and lighting only occurs in the non-flooded, the non-usual flooded zone. The other thing we did is, because we wanted lights, because we're crazy about lights, we did solar lights for the entire edges of the park. In other words, the entire edge, all the way around, on the bulkhead are little tiny solar lights. So when you see it from Mount Washington, you see this ring of beads of lights going around. And this is the view that we opened up by not having the wall come through to here. We now have a way to come up, and we have the redoubt, which is our important piece, our historic piece, with a huge flag from Washington. And we got the bikes in. They come in for the trail, up for certain races. They come in to the trailhead. This is on the water side. So we have them in there now, which is great. On the other Allegheny side, we did a similar thing. What you're seeing here is the overlook, which was redone. We have a whole handicapped accessibility coming down off of here. The flyover was redone, the path to the flyover was redone, so this is all accessible now. So that flyover, the universal accessibility, we had to screen the bypass. This is all spaghetti. This is all cars all the time. We put in the seasonal dockage. We had access to the water on this side as well. And this is that other side. In the beginning, we were going to do, these are the existing bleachers, and we were just going to put a set of steps in here. And so you see what we were doing here. Well, in the end, we did this whole thing into it. Here's the kayak areas. Kayaking is a big thing. You can rent boats over by PNC Park. There's boating all the time. This looks kind of funny, and its perspective here is funny. This actually is 18 inches higher than the pavement that's here. All of this pavement was picked up. All of it was put down again. These were all cleaned. There was stone replaced, and of course the promenade. This is a normal day with the docking, and here you see the solar lights as they go along the side. Very popular place to sit. This is also a popular fishing side. Here's the overlook, all with the native plantings that were put in underneath. The overlook redone. We flared the stairs down. We kept them here, but wrapped them around. All of this is new wall in order to get our 5% grade. This is what it looked like in '74. These are pictures from Bill and Tom, who gave me the shots of what it looked like. This is as we were complete putting it back in down at the lower area. This is the upper promenade. I had a long talk with them about street furniture. And Tom said to me, he said, oh, God, you know, it was just terrible stuff. They gave us a budget that was minuscule. We had to go into catalogs, and we had to buy the cheapest things we could find. And he says, they're god-awful, ugly, Marion. He says, please don't put them back. Just because they're there doesn't mean they're historic. And so it was really a funny conversation. He got up in a meeting to tell everybody that. And so we were allowed to go away from that. We did keep the edge, which was their original stone piece, which we kept that and reset it. Now, the paving. We had the stone edge, which are fieldstone. We had granite steps, sandstone sides. This is before it wrapped around. This was the original stair. These are the bleachers, which are all done in a sandstone as well. We had bluestone paving, and we had the limestone blocks, and we also had riverstone set. So those are all the types of pavings that we had in the park. And this is the redoing. I lost a battle. I lost a really big battle the only reason they let me put this bluestone in on the fountain plaza is because I did so much crying, but they insisted that on the lower promenade, because of the trucks they had to come in when they had to clean up, and they literally have to take inches of mud off every year, that they wanted me to do this in concrete. Bowmanite. I am not a fan of Bowmanite. This is what it looked like. It lasted about maybe 10 years before the flagstone, the bluestone, whatever you want to call it, started flaking off. And so the state finally said to me, I said, okay. I said, but how are we going to do this? Well, this man can hand cut these things. I could not believe this guy. I watched him for hours. It's all concrete. He then comes in and he chalks out the entire pattern. This is a very complicated pattern. And he cuts it by hand. And this is what it looks like. And the coloring of it, you won't believe how many samples we went through before we got the colors we wanted. The limestone block is all reset. It was the same block that was there. We took it up, put it back down again. And then this is the sandstone that we redid, new granite. Anytime we put in new stuff, we tried to get into the granite because we knew it would hold up better than trying to do this in bluestone. And also, one of the things when you're working on historic sites, the worst thing in the world you can do is put something in and make it look like it had been there forever. Historians get very upset with that. I had that in the necklace. We had the Longwood Bridge. Brookline could afford to put the steps in. Boston didn't have any money. So they did the steps. We suggested, well, why don't we build the steps on the other side? They went ballistic because, no, they were never there. They should never be put in. Doesn't matter whether they were designed. It doesn't matter whether they didn't have enough money. And we don't care if Boston can't get up on that side. So it's a very touchy kind of thing to get into. Here's the edge again as it's redone. You can see he's working down here. He's finished this. The hardest part about this is keeping the color consistent. Getting the right thing between pores and between staining. This is an integral color concrete. And the bulkhead, of course, was refurbished as well. This is the handicap ramp that goes up the side. So we literally sliced into this thing, and this is the bottom of it, took it out and took a set of steps up so we could get up to the pump house. Now on the other side, instead of just ending, this is the end of the original piece, we kept the stair, and we turned this into bleachers. So they are the exact replica of these, the same stone as those, bad, bad, bad. And we have the same detail on how you get up. And this is, again, a water taxi area and also can function as an amphitheater. This is our 5% grade, which everybody can come down, and our reuse of sandstone in order to be able to do that. So this was our complete answer to that on that side. Now I want to get into a little bit on the plants. This is Margaret Winters worked for Griswold. She was very well known. She went to O.E. Jennings at the Carnegie Museum. And he was a specialist in botany and plants, basically, and not only, but what was growing when, that kind of thing. And she was saying all planting in the western part of the park will resemble the primeval forest. as closely as possible to reproduce it. That's these woodlands. Now, if you look at this plan, you'll see it's a different plan. This is an early plan. The bastions are not where they're supposed to be because Stotts hadn't gone over to Britain yet. So this is a very early plan. And so this doesn't happen like that. But this is the primeval forest on the top here. And the rather thick plantations on the north and south lawn over in here, this is the city side, are supposed to be dealing with traffic. We have a major route coming through this. And she wanted to vegetate this, and this is, of course, where they ended up putting a parking lot in. So these were her plans. We have her planting plans and his planting plans. We know exactly what was planted where. And I do have to say that we know when they put those trees in, they went into the archaeological layer. So when we were doing this, we were told on no uncertain terms we were never to dig a hole any deeper than 18 inches within this area. And in fact, they found an original French drain. They found the original drain of how they drained out the fort. And it was a drainage track that was found when we were working in here. So what we ended up having to do is raise the grade in certain places. Any of the trees we had in were fine. We didn't want to take any out anyway. And when we added trees, either small flowering trees or larger scale trees, major trees, we had to have it raised. In other words, enough so that we could get the root ball in. And so that was very much, they also, right from the very beginning, had a scattering of trees out into the lawn, which we kept. A lot of these are big oaks now. These all exist. There's their planting details. This is what it looked like. Now, unfortunately, what happened is they didn't have enough money to buy the trees when they did 54. But they had oodles of money to buy little tiny plants, all the species that they were going to put in for the understory, the shrubs and the herbaceous. They planted them. They didn't live because they had no shade. And basically, within a year or two, they were gone. And things were just disappeared. Here you can see when they were planted in, and then they disappeared. Here they are when they were soon, and still there in 74. Here they are, 79. We're starting to lose them. The maintenance people got out there and said, it's just too much work to take care of a primeval forest. We're going to just get rid of everything and start mowing. And so that's what happens. Maintenance is extremely important in any park. So here we are, driving the maintenance people crazy again. And we have replanted. And this looks messy, I know, and it's supposed to look messy because it's a primeval forest. It's not a residential planting. We snuck in bike racks where we could. Of course, there never was a bike rack on site before. We ended up replacing water. We have water fountains in a number of places. This is what it looked like in 79 on the south side. They never put the planting in underneath on the south side, and this is the great lawn. And the only seating that was there was really this edge, and people did sit on it. Here it is today. We've underplanted all of it now, again, and this is the great lawn down to the fountain. This is the plantings as they went in, 2008, Chionanthus, wild geraniums. The fall color is spectacular. May apples, looking a little scruffy, yeah, and this is heading towards fall because of the type of species that are there now. But we're looking like we're a forest or a woodland. Early spring flowering like the redbud, fall wood asters. And this is looking at the amphitheater area. You saw it under construction. Well, now the planting is in. That's the island that is been replanted, and this is that woods. And this is it in the piece, and it looks scraggly. And the biggest problem we had is they didn't understand that when the May apples die, the May apples die down, they bloom, they flower, they disappear. And the guys got out there with the mulch and started throwing mulch all over the place. I had to have a hissy fit to stop them from mulching the heck out of everything, so they were going to kill the herbaceous layer. But I have them doing it now. And here we are. We always do Big Splash. We always do big events. We had at least 4 openings for this park. Every time we've completed a phase, we had another opening. But here we are on June 7th, 2013, having our big grand opening. And here is the event at night, lighting off of PPG, off the Pittsburgh Glass Building, down to the fountain. And you can see the amount of light that is a normal night in Pittsburgh. And that's it. Any questions? I can't see out there with that thing on.
Do you have an irrigation system?
Yes, yes, I will tell you about that. What we decided was, and I didn't tell you about the lawn on the city side has structural fill under it. It has an under drainage system and it has an irrigation system. That way, all of that, those thousands of people, and it's been kept up, and we've had it in now, it's been about 5 years now, so, and it's still living. The rest of the system, what we did is we said, let's put in temporary heads and water for the woodlands, because if we didn't give them water and we hit drought, we were going to lose them. So the idea is they're not allowed to use it unless there's a drought situation. And so what they do is they have a whole system, these high things that come up and spray, that does the woodlands. We then started having a lot of activity on the Great Lawn. We decided not to dig it all up again, put structural fill under it and do that, but we do have a sprinkler system that can be turned on if there's a drought situation. So we do have that, yes. If we didn't, we would have lost the plants just like they did the first time. Unfortunately. Yes, go ahead.
Did you ever have a public charrette or
Oh, yeah.
ask for any public input during this? And how
Oh,
did that
oh,
go?
yeah, I don't even know how to tell you about this. You've done public input, I'm sure. We went on for 2 years. We went on for 2 years of public input. Started 2002, ended, the master plan was done 2004. I would guess we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 meetings. And we had meetings, we'd go whole day meetings. We'd have a topic, let's talk about historic interpretation. And we'd have a whole bunch of people who'd come in and talk about it. Let's talk about plantings. We had, in a whole day kind of thing, we would have numerous meetings on various topics. We then had general sessions where everybody got to talk. We also met with on our committee, we had over 100 people who were continually there for us. In other words, they were assigned to be part of the group, and they would come to all these meetings. And they were very boisterous and very opinionated. And they were great fun, in actuality. And we talked to the people who had the fishing things. We had to work with that. We talked to the kayaking people, the boating people. I mean, there's just so many people, and you can see the interest. Everybody wanted to have an event at the park. And that's why when Lisa was working on the master plan for it, at River Life, they were trying to take some of the events that were happening at the center and tried to take them to the sides. In other words, they were trying to have venues in other places that people could have events. It's terribly impacted by events. And it's fun. You can go there almost any time in the summer and have something going on. They really use it. Yes, sir.
Marion, I'm reflecting back to your image in 1950. I don't know if I have the name correct, the Carnegie Club, initial planning.
Oh, the Duquesne Club.
Duquesne Club. Not one woman at that table.
No, there wasn't.
So I'm glad to see that.
No, Margaret Winters was the only woman involved. That's why I put her on stage here, because she was the only woman really involved. No, they were all men, and the Duquesne Club is still very much male-dominated. The man who was the head of for the committee was one of the people from the Duquesne Club, and they all participated. I mean, we had the guy from the Dollar Bank, we had the PNC Bank people, we had the people, all these people participated. I mean, on that committee of people were a lot of people like CEOs of various businesses in Pittsburgh. They are really an amazing group of people. The best fun is to go out on a riverboat trip with them, and they do these big riverboat parties. And the very first time I went out, this man comes up to me and he says, "I'm from Heinz. I'm the CEO of Heinz." I said, "Oh, great, nice to meet you." He says, "Have you been pickled?" And I said, "No, I'm not pickled." He says, "Well, I'm going to pickle you." And he pulls out a little plastic green pickle, and I should have worn it tonight, and pins it on my jacket. So I got tickled on the first tour I went on the boat. So they're very active people. And a lot of money comes from these foundations. All of those jamborees that Dollar Bank puts on, they pay for everything. When PNC does it, they pay for everything. I mean, it's an amazing resource. I wish we had it in Boston. We don't have that. Katie?
about creating the forest primeval.
Yeah.
Was the planting based on Margaret? Or
Yes, no, it was definitely, no, Gary and I worked on it, so you can understand. We took the original plan. We took the Jennings plant list. We looked at it to see if there were any invasives, number one, just in case. We also tried to get things that were more native. In other words, we tried not to get hybrid varieties of things. And we literally went through the list, and every plant that's there is on the list. And we had to redo some of it because of the fact that there were big trees and too much shade for some things. So we respected the list. We didn't always put everything in the same place because of the amount of shade we had in certain areas. But yes, we did. We literally used native plants from Jennings and from Winter's plants.
And is the maintenance on that basically a light hand to
Yeah.
let everything blend together?
Yeah.
Eventually, everything is going to sort of take.
Yeah, well, once I got Matt Green in hand, I should say one other thing that I really, really pushed for, which may sound sort of silly, but I've had a lot of experience in the Emerald Necklace Parks with rangers, and the idea that you had rangers in the park, and that they did certain things, and how the maintenance was going to be done. And so one of the things that I kept saying to the state park, I said, you just can't let the city take care of this. I said, you can't let the guys with the mowing machines out there. You've got to get special people who have horticultural background. I got backing from Carnegie on that. The department came down and gave backing to that. And we ended up with rangers. We ended up with Matt Green coming in as the supervisor. The maintenance was taken over by the state, and they are trying very hard. They haven't, I still have the mulching problem. I still, I'll take pictures when I'm out there and I'll send them to Matt. He said, oh, they made a mistake there. I said, Matt, get that mulch out of there. So, I mean, he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand that having scruffy, having some weeds in there is not a bad thing. The more important thing is to make it look like a woodland and not to have mulch everywhere. So, yes, it's been hard to sell.
I have two questions. One is, for a project that's taken years, how many people in your office have worked on it in addition to you?
Oh, let me see. Sue left, she's in Shanghai. Sue did most of the supervision on phase 1 and worked on that. Jay Emperor, who's still in our office, was one of the first project managers. Then Gary Forst, who I've told you about, who does planting, that we know. He's worked on the planting plans. Had Andy on it for a while, Andy Elliott. Gary did grading plans. A lot of people worked on it. But with a project like this, I am at all the meetings. Because when you do a project like this, they expect you to be at all the meetings. And so it's, even though you're principal in charge, you're also in many ways the project manager, because they don't want somebody else coming and conducting a meeting. I could bring people to be there when we do workshops. And that's not mentioning the civil engineers, that's not mentioning my fantastic architect Rob Pfaffman in his office who came, our interpretive guy, Thompson, our archaeologist who came in. We had a host of other people that were working on this as well. We had a cost estimator. We had a lot of other people that were there.
Second question, the river. When you designed the pavements and the walls, is everything rigid construction, or
Yeah.
is it intended to move? And when things come down the river,
All right, one of the things that we were able to, I guess, do illegally is we have in any of the major flood zone, we do not have handrails. We purposely do not have benches that could be whacked out by anything. We have lights that if they're submerged, they're solar, they're not going to die. So there's a lot of things in that lower area that are that way. I mean, we did it for that reason. And I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's like the ecology of a river that floods as often as it does, that has the major ice jams that come down through there. It can do unbelievable amounts of damage. So you have that war zone in that lower promenade and even on the fountain itself. And I'm not kidding. I should have put the picture in. I have a picture of like 5 or 6 boats of different sizes. It looks like huge hand, took them and stuck them into the fountain like this. And they're literally in the fountain. And that happens all the time. Trees, branches, mud. It's amazing what a war zone that is. And so that's how we treated it. And it's done, the cobbles don't have the water going through, because if they did, the mud would be a mess. We have to have everything on that lower promenade so they can come in and wash it off. And we have no railings, because you don't have to with a river that's boating. And so we have, in some ways, not done all of the railings and things we probably should do in that lower zone, because otherwise they'll be gone the first or second flood.
Marion, one of the benefits that our profession likes to showcase is economic gain as a result of a project,
Yeah.
Especially a major one as
Yeah.
you presented tonight. The 4 buildings that form the east edge of the park,
Yeah.
have they found that their real estate has increased and that their activities also have gained?
Interestingly, the head of the Post-Gazette was part of the committee, very outspoken man. His was one of those buildings. The hotel went through a total renovation about halfway through the project. As soon as we finished the city side, the hotel got bought out by somebody else, and they have totally refurbished that hotel. The housing hasn't changed any, as far as I know. I mean, the housing, there's housing there. Office space hasn't changed, as far as I know. But that area of town is doing very well. It's a major shopping area if you go up a Liberty. If you go up Liberty, you come to the Gateway Center, which we also did, which is their new underground rail, their underground thing that goes over to the north side. There's an underground train now that goes under. And that's all very, very prosperous. And as a result of the park happening, I think you get more people coming downtown. You get a lot more people. It's more used. And I think that's true of Pittsburgh in many areas. Market Square was redone. A lot of things started to happen. When money was invested one place, other money started happening. Convention Center came in about halfway through. It's to the east, it's up on the north side. A lot has happened. Heinz Stadium was redone, not because of our park, but that was done. PNC Park was redone. The whole north side is there's new hotels over there. There's a new gambling casino over there. The science thing was there to begin with. So what Lisa's charge was to get this economic development. That's why the Allegheny Conference is so involved in it, and why they stayed involved in '54, and why they continue to be involved as an equal partner with River Life, all through the whole thing. And so economics was a big deal. They're trying to improve their city, and they have. I mean, it's been amazing in 12 years what they've accomplished.
I want to thank you.
You're
Marion.
welcome.
Thank you very much.